Hey, what's up, everybody? Michael here for the M3 Creative Studio, and we are continuing our Atlanta Film Production Group interview series. Today, we are speaking with Gable Marynell, storyboard extraordinaire, storyboard artist. How you doing, sir?
Doing pretty well. How are you?
Good. I think there's only been one time I've actually gotten to speak with a storyboard artist. I've not been privileged enough to really have the budgets to work where that can afford the storyboard artist.
It's more of a niche sort of aspect of the film production industry and everything. I know some of the other storyboard artists in town, but we're usually pretty busy and don't exactly get to hang out a whole lot. But
How long have you been doing storyboard work?
a little over 10 years at this point. I mean, I started in college, but
So you're like an OG, you're a veteran.
actually, no, I'd be considered a novice. Like,
Really, at 10 years?
Most of the people that are like working on your tier 3 stuff have been doing it they're like in their mid 40s, 50s, 60s. So yeah, they usually started doing something else, like working for an animation company or being an industrial designer or something like that. And then like the guys who did the original Star Wars trilogy, those were not storyboard artists. Lucas pulled them in from, I can't remember, I think they did like automobile engineer illustrations or something.
Oh,
So they
wow.
knew how to draw those lines really quickly and they understood perspective and straight lines and everything. He had to give them a crash course in film language halfway through storyboarding A New Hope. I have the book on this. I know
That's a lot of information. So would you say that are you doing more work with like advertising agencies versus film type stuff?
It depends on the year. I mean, there are some years I go through where the majority of my money is made through doing commercial work. And then you get put on a Netflix show and do that for 6 months, and then you get put on independent feature. I mean, you just kind of, as a freelance artist, you got to take what you can get, you know?
Yeah, and I think is the majority are the majority of storyboard artists, are they predominantly freelance, or are there some that are tied into an agency, or how does that work?
I'd say it's probably about half and half. If you live in LA, you're probably with an agency. I was with one for a little bit, but because they were out in LA and I was here, like it kind of just didn't make sense. But most of your like top tier guys they get their work through just their reputation at this point, because they've been doing it for 40 years, you know. Like Dan Milligan, who's my hero. I think he lives in somewhere in Canada. I think Montreal or Toronto or something. Like, he doesn't have to go anywhere. Like,
No, it's just going to come to him, and
Right.
they're going to be like, okay, yeah, we'll just do everything through email,
Exactly, yeah.
Zoom meetings, and all that stuff.
He's worked on just about everything. He does a lot of video games now, which I'm noticing, which is really cool.
That's probably a big stretch.
Well, the cinematics within the cutscenes and video games and stuff, like all that
Yeah.
stuff has to be storyboarded and sent to, you know, wherever they're getting it done, because it's all CGI.
So, like with the storyboarding, because I know you mentioned some 2D animation stuff, is it one of those, being a storyboard artist is kind of like you have multiple facets in order to maintain a living, or can you solely make a living just storyboarding, or do you have to have like some of these other functions to kind of just fill in the gaps when you're not storyboarding?
Right now, yeah, but I mean, talk to me in 20 years. Maybe I'll get to the point where like I can pick and choose my jobs. I do. I mean, I don't like turning down work, period, no matter how busy I am. Because even if I have to, sometimes I'll outsource it to a friend who needs work or something like that. And like just take a percentage of finder's fee or something like that, as long as it's fair to the artist. But yeah, I mean, it really just depends. I'm also didn't come from LA. I as soon as I graduated Ringling College of Art and Design, I decided to stay here in Atlanta because I saw what was happening, and I'm like, if I could just stay here long enough,
Right, just to catch the wave.
right, and just like, and because most of the people that work crew and things like that are Georgia based, they all at least know who I am, even if it's just through Facebook or social media or whatever. Because a lot of times I'll wake up in the morning and have like 2 people tag me in a post on one of the production groups, like, "Hey, you need a storyboard artist." Like, I
Right.
usually have 2 or 3 people that know who I am. And I mean, that's what networking's all about.
Right, absolutely. Is so I think for people that may have not worked or had the opportunity to work with a storyboard artist, there's kind of like possible misconception that, you know, it's beyond just cartoons and animation. Like there's live storyboard for like film, TV,
Right.
movies, and stuff like that. Is there when you get into storyboarding, do you specialize in one or the other, or is it each its own niche within like a subcategory under storyboarding?
Usually, if you do animation, that is what you do. But there are people that have transitioned. I mean, I started in computer animation. That's what my degree is in. But I very quickly realized I did not want to work in that field. It's a lot of work. Studio hours are pretty brutal. And a lot of times you do not get paid what you deserve, and you're doing the majority of the work. You're having to do the cinematography, do a lot, like, if depending on how far along the character designers have gotten, like sometimes you got to do some of that prop design, and you got to do like a large portion of the animation too, because there's so many keyframes in between. By the time the animators get her, they don't have to want to do a lot of guesswork.
That's interesting.
But this, again, that's not a blanket statement for all studios. That has just been sort of my experience. And a lot of the other storyboard artists that I've talked to in animation, I always wanted to do live action. I love the more painterly quality that a lot of the storyboards for live action have, and that's kind of my style anyway. Because a lot of times you gotta stay on model if you're doing animation. And that type of work just isn't for me. It's not my style.
Yes.
But yeah, usually you choose one or the other.
So with the because I know you have to be fast at drawing, or
Yeah.
relatively fast, but how well do you have to be able to draw? Like for someone that really loves possibly the idea of sketching out ideas and putting them in a frame sequence type thing, but they're not necessarily a drawer or artist per se.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely should understand perspective if you're going to attempt to do storyboards. Now, if you're a director and you have, at least a general understanding of draftsmanship or drawing or anatomy or whatever, a lot of them will like just sketch out their little thumbnails as long as they're clear. If the DP can understand the director, as long as everybody's on the same page with what that drawing represents, then it doesn't really matter. But as a professional storyboard artist, yeah, you should probably know how to draw.
It's definitely not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Right.
Mostly anatomy, perspective, and a little bit of technical, because you got to draw a lot of cars and things like that. But it depends on your style. Some people just, like I said, do it like Dan. He does stuff very painterly, and it's like he starts out with just shapes, and then we'll define little details. It's all about the nuance, what is the right amount of detail that I can get away with to get this done fast and still be clear. It's a balance that I still am working on. It's crazy.
So is there, and I got to ask just because I know digital has changed things so much, is there now software that you could basically not necessarily have to know how to draw, but you're able to build your storyboard and use it from a digital perspective versus hand? Or is that frowned upon in the...
No. There's a lot of factions to that question.
It's the most famous piece of our industry as well. It depends.
It depends, yes.
It depends.
People have been doing storyboards digitally since Photoshop's been a thing, and being able to use a tablet to draw. A lot of the artists nowadays really like Procreate because it's light and fast, and I don't particularly. I would use Procreate, but I don't like. You have to do it on the iPad, and I don't like the workflow there, especially with saving files and compiling and everything. The way I work is I start on paper.
Okay.
I usually meet with the director, not always, but usually. When I meet with the director, we sit down, we go through the script, we talk about how we want the shots to progress and the film language and the angles and everything that they want. And as we're going through that, I'm drawing little thumbnails, trying to make sure that we're both visual on the same page. And once we get through all that, I take all that home and I scan it in or digitize it somehow, whether it's taking pictures or whatever. And then I use that, bring it into, I use Sketchbook Pro
Okay.
by Autodesk, but I've used Corel Painter, I've used Photoshop. If I'm trying to distort something or need to change perspective on anything like that, I usually bring it into Photoshop because those tools are pretty solid. But yeah, and then I'll save it out as a JPEG or PNG or whatever, and then take it into InDesign and put it into a PDF. That way, it's super clean and everything's organized. If I got to change something, I can do it really quick.
Yeah, because I was thinking too, like from the as drawing as opposed to doing or like doing design work like within Photoshop or even Illustrator could be more time intensive as opposed to if you can draw sketching something out and lining it up, especially if like you're in the first draft and you're just trying to get an idea to the director.
Absolutely. This is why I start on paper. And I've talked to a few other artists about this, and some of us feel the same way and some don't. But I started on paper because I can visually see my shot better. I don't know what it
Gotcha.
is. It's about it being physically in front of me. Now, when I do digital, I still can, but for some reason it take my eye and brain to line up a lot longer to get that shot angle that I want or that's being asked of me. So a lot of times it's something about just the speed and I do it in pen too. I know I can't erase it. I have to do it. I
Right.
have to work with what I got.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not the only one that thinks that way. It's just something mentally that I can get that perspective done faster. And then that all I got to do is trace it, manipulate it,
Right,
own
right, right.
drawing digitally. But it's not always that way.
So what is the as far as like where in the process do you come in pre-production when is it at the very because like and this is probably going to be one of those it depends and it's a loaded question because I think about like okay are you coming in at the point where locations have been locked so you actually have a space that you can reference of where this is going to be shooting or you know the shot at what point is the director providing the shot list tied to the location or are you like very beginning before all that?
It's all according to that particular project or production. I've a lot of times with commercials, advertisements, whatever. That director or writer already has their shots in mind. I can't even think of a time where I was asked to do a shot list on a commercial because they're very particular and it's a brand. Like the brand is the story, so or the product or whatever.
Right.
So a lot of times that's just like, here you go, draw this, and I'm like, okay, which is super easy, but usually they have really harsh deadlines, which it's a ebb and flow kind of thing. But then I've been on independent productions like Through the Glass Darkly. That was filmed in I believe Jasper. And their art department had locations and pictures, but I was working, so it was about 14,000 drawings. They had every scene storyboarded, and I had to do it in about 3 months. So I was literally sending in.
So are you going for, is it shot by shot that you're sketching then? At that point, if they have the shot list?
The director and I did the shot list together. It
Okay.
was like 88 pages or something. It was ridiculous. But we learned a lot doing it. It was her, Lauren Foss. It was her first time directing a feature length. She had done a bunch of shorts before. But yeah, I mean,
Was it her first time with a storyboard artist?
I think kind of. I think she had maybe done some of her own storyboards for some. I can't really remember, so that could be incorrect. But first time on this scale, absolutely.
Right, yeah. So just for people that may not know, like what are some of the advantages of having the storyboard artist, especially like live action stuff?
I mean, I always say like we're the first people to ever visualize the script, and through doing so,
Interesting.
almost especially with independent stuff, that's where your budget comes from. A lot of times, they can finalize the budget for like stunts, VFX. Where they're going to use a green screen or whatever. Like they can figure all that out if they have that visual in front of them, and it helps save money in the end. You're paying one guy to draw out and help plan out what the director wants versus an entire crew later on if you screw up. So like
That's a really
30
good
people,
perspective. Yeah.
I mean, like paying 30 people a day rate or whatever versus just me doing it, and then we can go back and edit it to fix it the way you want now in pre-production before you actually go into production. But like I said, there's times too, even on Raising Dion, where I'm turning in storyboards 2 weeks before they have to shoot the scene. But to further answer your question too, like with say Through the Glass Darkly, where I was having to churn these things out super quick, I was doing it based off what their shooting schedule was. So it was in that order. And then I get a call sometimes the night before, like, hey, because of this and this happening, we had to switch the schedule. So now this scene needs to be done by the morning. And I'm like, oh, I'm halfway through doing whatever I'm doing. I look back, like, okay, now I got to get 60 drawings done by 7 a.m. and it's 9:30 p.m. now.
That sounds like almost an unreal expectation.
You go into robot mode. I mean, I don't prefer to work that way, but I had become friends with these people at this point. I mean, even though I was working for them, like we have gone through this gauntlet of trying to get this production done.
So you're kind of gonna go a little bit above and beyond just because you have that relationship built, and it's like you want to see the project succeed and all those. Not that you want any of them to fail, but I'm just saying like you're a little
Personal
bit
investment.
personal investment
Yeah.
is a lot. It's a lot different.
It's with. I mean, like I'm considering these people like, they're my soldiers in the trenches, just like I am.
Right.
And like I don't want to disappoint them. I don't want to disappoint the director, and I don't want this production to fail. So, like, if they're really riding on me getting to this at 7 a.m., or at least the first part of it so they can get started, and then I can get the return later on to that day. I mean, I did not, none of us slept.
Right.
That production was brutal, but it turned out really well. I was very impressed with it.
So this is another one of those loaded variable, it depends questions, because that's just all we ask here. That's all. It depends. It's always going to be
In this industry, that's pretty much standard, I feel like.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, so when you come onto a project, I'm just sitting here in our discussion. I'm just thinking about like all the different things that vary, that depend on how you attack something. So it's like, I know there's going to be the shot list that you're either provided to or coming up with the director, but how much does the way the DP's lighting it, the production designer who's doing all the, are
you
they
asking how close they stick to the storyboards?
Well, how much of it are you involved? Like, are they telling you and then you're going back, or is it something you're building a reference and they build off of that? What is the?
I guess this will answer one of your previous questions I don't actually feel like I get to. Like sometimes when I am given locations, you were asking about like what I have to go off a lot of times. Like again, Through the Glass Darkly, all I had was an address for some of them. Like there's one giant scene that takes place at a quarry, so I had to look up like satellite images from Google and basically print them out and draw over them on like paths of where the camera's gonna go, because it's all like kind of a chase scene and stuff. And the shots have to be planned very carefully. But yeah, a lot of times I have to figure that like basic layout on how that's gonna happen. But to answer your other question, it depends.
I guess give me an example, I guess, out of one, because I think everyone knows it's going to be variable.
I've walked into a room where I've already had the shot list printed out for me. I still have to make my own based off because I want to make sure that those words is exactly visually what this client wants. So I still have to end up making my own, which they almost never see. But if they already have their own. And then there's sometimes I walk in and it's me, the director, the DP, and like the director of VFX. If it's a VFX heavy scene, like on Raising Dion. Like there was one where we spent 8 hours in a room all together trying to figure out like how were they going to do, because Raising Dion deals with a young girl who has I believe it's bone marrow deficiency.
Okay.
So we had to be very careful with her because at one point she had to be lifted up. So we had to figure out where we're going to put the green screen, how we're going to do this safely without hurting her.
How, and I don't, otherwise I'll forget this question, but how in depth do you have to know about green screen and how that works to do your job efficiently?
I feel like most storyboard artists that have been working in the industry for a while have a general understanding of it. If you work in visuals, you probably should. But my background with computer animation and stuff, like I already kind of knew about all that with VFX and compositing and everything.
So but that definitely
It
is
helped.
a plus. It's a big help.
Absolutely helped. I would have been just a fly on the wall in that conversation if
Yeah, because you'd
I'm like,
sure.
just tell me what to draw.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's always interesting though, because like sometimes you just don't realize, like when you think about, like you watch the credits of a film, right? And then there's a gazillion names in the credits, but there's such intricate pieces to it,
Right.
and
What's funny is craft services usually becomes before storyboard artists in the credits. Kind of interesting.
well, feeding people is pretty
It
important.
is, absolutely. I'm not diminishing it. I'm always at the end. Always.
I'm not downplaying the worth of a storyboard artist, but I know people that will work for food. So, you know what I
absolutely.
mean?
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
good food, people are going to work for. Good drawing, not going to go the same distance as good food. But, and then you mentioned it earlier. How often, what's the percentage rate that comes from storyboard drawing and ends up in the final? Like, how drastic does it change?
I've had productions where I finally get to see the final product. I'm like, oh my god, it's like 90% of my shots that I drew. Like, that's really cool. And then there's some where something happens, or it just ends up they get in there the day. Maybe it rains, they can't do certain shots, or I see like mutated versions of what I drew.
Does that hurt the soul?
No,
No?
I understand that it really, my job is to start them off, and whatever it ends up being, it ends up being. But then you've got some productions like Gone with the Wind wouldn't have happened without the storyboards. Like that production was like going down, and all they had visually was the storyboards, and that's one of the only reasons why they were still able to make that film. And that's the case with a lot of them, especially the more independent you go, if
Right.
they are able to afford storyboards. But it just depends.
Well, that brings up an interesting thing, because I think I think in the creative world, especially on the indie side of things, where it's non-union and people try to figure out like, okay, what do I charge for this type of service, and how that because at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to, especially in the creative world, is that people are compensating us for our time and knowledge expertise. It's not something that's technically tangible, like when you go to the store and you purchase a product for this price, and it's based on what it costs to manufacture, get it there, and then the markup of the store. So for something like storyboarding, how is that priced out?
Most of us industry standard who are professional do a day rate because that covers our time. If we get a fight sequence that's a lot of cuts and a lot of drawings, I mean, that's going to take a lot longer than, say, like if I were to storyboard this, this being a conversation that would probably use
Like a two-shot? Yeah.
Anyway, we use the day rates for that, and you kind of just have to figure out what your time's worth. And a lot of times the day rates in LA are going to be higher than here, and also depends on your experience. I mean,
Right.
and for me, I usually have a sliding scale for independent productions that don't necessarily have the budget to afford like the Netflix day rates.
Right. Can I ask what that is, roughly? A Netflix day rate, just out of curiosity?
I'll give you a range.
Okay.
It can be anywhere from 700 to 1020 for a day for 8 hours.
Wow.
But it depends. Again, like
Yeah. There's a lot. I know there's a lot of factors in it, but
Yeah.
I think most people are just interested on like what the starting point is. So
Right.
like it's just because at the end of the day, it's like, well, what do I like? Someone that's really good at what they do, but it's like, well, there's not like a blueprint that really says, because at the end of the day, it's like you may be willing. I'm sure there's things that you've taken just because you felt a way about the project, or
Of
it was a
course,
relationship,
absolutely.
and it wasn't like what your normal day rate would be. So
Well, we as storyboard artists have gotten a few groups together online to where we're trying to make sure that we're getting compensated appropriately.
and
because
other
a lot
ones
of-
aren't undercutting just to get the work, because it kind
We're
of
trying
gives
to
a-
work together. It's almost like a union without having a union. Because
Right.
there is no. I mean, my union would be 479, but unless there was a union just for like art department and storyboards and pre-visuals, is kind of, I don't know. It wouldn't necessarily benefit me that much to be part of the union, so I haven't been able to justify it yet. But some people do. I don't know. From what I can tell, I don't really see that it helps all that much for storyboard artists. If you work on set, then yeah, go absolutely. Please try to get your card.
Yeah.
But I work from home most of the time. Like I don't really need workman's comp or anything like that.
Right.
So it just doesn't make sense for me.
So with the way the day rate works, so like is there a different day rate like in the pre-production where you're not necessarily drawing, you're just kind of getting? Are you still doing a day rate at that point? Like if it's just through meetings and having discussions,
yes, it's still my time.
Right, but is it? Are you still pricing it the same as if it was your
Yes.
time drawing? So that's the day rate. So if we have 6 meetings, I don't draw anything. We're just discussing, and I'm getting notes. It's still going to be the.
It's very rare that I'm not drawing something. Like I was explaining earlier, like
Oh,
if I'm in
yeah.
discussions, I'm still like doing my thumbnails and making sure I want to do as much as I can with the director when I have their time, so that I'm not making mistakes and having to do a bunch of
Right.
edits later. Because I don't like doing edits. They don't want to have to ask me to do edits. We want to get it as close as we can the first time.
So when working with directors, how has is it collaborative as opposed to where you may be able to provide ideas on certain things, or is it more like the director's just saying, this is what I need, this is what I want, how's that? I know it depends.
Yes, it does.
On the director, of course. But in your experience, what has it been more of, one way or the other?
The only person I really answer to in general is going to be the director, or I mean, everybody answers to the executive producers, but
Some are not as involved in that process.
right, exactly. And the same thing with directors. Sometimes the director just wants to show up on set and yell action and make sure that he's getting the performances that he wants, and then leaves the rest up to the DP and the storyboard artist. It just, it depends.
It depends. Of course it does.
I've been on. I mean, it's kind of like with the ad agency things. Like sometimes I just show up and just draw. Like I know when to keep my mouth shut, judging off the interaction that I'm watching around me. And sometimes I'll test the water too. I'll bring up something like just to have an alternative shot in case this one doesn't work. How about this? And I'll draw that out. And sometimes they'll be like, I want to stick with what I got. And then sometimes they'll be like, oh, that's a really good idea. I didn't think about that. Let's try both.
So does in the process of storyboarding, is it also developing the blocking of a scene because of you're laying out the composition of it, and then you're talking about camera moves, angles. So in something that's moving, as far as how much does that play into it when you go through your script analysis with the director?
Especially if it is a scene where there's a lot of action happening or a lot of moving around, or if there's a lot of characters, I literally will take, if they've got aerial photos, that's great. Mm-hmm. A lot of times they just have a site photographer go around and take pictures for the art department and everything, or the director or whatever. But I try to take those pictures, any visual information I have, to create an orthographic top-down, like bird's eye view, basically. Mm-hmm. And then I go through with the director, and I'm like, okay, so are you thinking they come out here from this door and go here, and then the camera swings over this way, then we do a reverse, where do you want the wide shot from? And I literally go through and number the camera movements on an orthographic in order to... I don't know if other storyboard artists do that. It's just what I do, and I've done it because I was taught layout in college, and that's how I learned how to storyboard. Mm-hmm. Because in 3D, you're creating everything. You're creating the set, the characters. You can do whatever you want with the camera, so I had to figure all that out beforehand, and that's just still how my mind works.
Yeah.
Because I've had some directors be like, I've never had a storyboard artist go this in depth with them. Like, well, I want to make sure I get it right, and this is the best way to, you're hiring me to visually help you tell the story. Or it just makes sense for me, and I've never had it not help.
Yeah, no, I think no one's ever going to complain about too many details when it comes, or too much planning in this industry. I mean, it all at the end of the day, like you said it earlier, it saves money on the back end from not having as much error, and allows you to be more efficient.
That's the whole idea, especially if you've got CGI objects, VFX that the actors cannot see. or the directors cannot see. Like if you're doing like Lord of the Rings or something, half,
Right.
70% of the set's not there. It helps the actors too. Like, okay, this is where I'm going to be looking here. They're figuring out their.
So I guess
line.
I guess in that type of like something Lord of the Rings, your drawings are absolutely essential to everybody because it's providing. Because I remember seeing some BTS of Alice in Wonderland, and like the film is like 98%
Right.
green screen. So it's like how I would assume at that point even the actors are like referring back to the storyboard so they get an idea of their surroundings.
I mean, it's got to help. It would be. I'm not an actor. I'm surrounded by actors, but I'm not an actor. But
Right.
I do like. I can't imagine like acting to a green ball.
I know
you
it's
know.
amazing what we see. Like I love seeing the different things like on IG where you have like the before and after, and it's
Right.
just like it's incredible what some of those actors can do.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too. That's changing. We were always taught that either 70% of it needs to be CGI or 70% of the set needs to be practical. Like you got to pick one because you trying to merge a 50-50 is you're going to see what's fake and what's not real easy if you don't have a good compositor.
And that's a big thing too.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's probably they're rare, right? Like I mean, like as far as like the people that are industry level, it's a small pool of those people that are. It's not as common as your camera ops and stuff like that.
From my experience, most of the compositors that work on your big name stuff are usually with a studio. I mean, there are some independent people, but yeah, I mean, compositing is extremely important. That's the fine polishing of the entire thing.
So at some point you work with them if you're
No, that's post. They sometimes they will take the storyboards and use it to help. A lot of times the editors will too, because I have to think like an editor as well. Like, how is this shot going to go into that shot? How long is this shot going to last? Especially if I'm doing an animatic.
what is an animatic?
An animatic is like a like first, second pass, third pass type of like a basically the storyboard's put into motion. That's kind of an animation.
Okay.
And it can have sound. It can. I'm actually working on an animatic right now for T-Pain, and I got to go through and do all the Foley art and stuff, and work on the timing with that. But they're all my storyboards that I just went and put in. So a lot of times you use layers where you can animate it in After Effects, things like that. It's just a visual. What am I trying to? My brain just went dead. It's an animation of what you're trying to get to. So
Gotcha.
it's the most complete you can get before actually filming something.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because a lot of times you'll even bring in some of the animatics are essential for animation. You have
Right.
to do animatics. But for live action, they're not always there. Like I know Marvel, whenever they do any of their crazy VFX scenes, action stuff, like I remember seeing the animatic. I can't remember the storyboard artist's name off the top of my head. Federico something. Anyway, he did the animatic for the Iron Man 3 sequence when his house is getting blown up and falling. I think that's Iron Man 3. I can't remember. Anyway, where it's falling off into the ocean, the side of the cliff, and those things are awesome. You get a good animatic artist, they're a pleasure.
It's a skill set. It's a skill set all of its own. It's
right.
Yeah. It's
a lot
like,
of times they're a mixture of CGI too. So you'll have like 3D animation out that's posted out of Maya or something.
Right.
And then that's combined with hand drawings on top of it, which is always really cool. I actually prefer those over the full 3D animated ones. But yeah.
With becoming a storyboard artist do you find more of the people in your field are out of college as opposed to like self-taught? Like, is there? I know the conversation of film school is always it's not necessarily a heated debate because the biggest thing that's coming out of film school is the relationships you build and opportunities that lead you. It's not necessarily
Pay for networking.
Right. Do you find that to be the same in your field, or is there? What's your take on it? Because I know you went through the school function. I just didn't know if there, how often other people are self-taught in your realm.
I feel like this question always gets me in trouble. My experience was going through Ringling College of Art and Design, which is a very difficult school to get in and even more difficult to get out. It's basically boot camp for animators. I did learn a lot. I was exposed to a lot of software, a lot of hardware, a lot of extremely talented people, peers and educators alike.
It sounds intimidating.
Yeah. It was a
It
lot.
lets you know real quick if you're built to do this or not, I would assume. It weeds them out real quick.
Most people that aren't going to make it either transfer or they go to a different major or they leave second year because that's when you start really dipping into the CGI stuff. I got to be honest with you, I'm not that great at animating in 3D at all. It's not my forte. I can animate in 2D all day long. It just 3D animation is more of puppetry than it is, but it's still the same principles apply. But yeah, that's why I was like, I need to go into live action. I really like the storytelling aspect. And I like the fact that when drawing a storyboard, I have a lot of control over what things are going to look like. And like, you really get to affect the mise en scène of what is probably to come with the final product. But to answer your question though, most storyboard artists that I have come in contact with have some form of formal training, either figure drawing and anatomy classes through, like a art institute or through some other art school or whatever, and maybe like a visual storytelling class. Some of them went through full out art school. Some of them did go to UCLA. Like it's just a lot of them went to Cal Arts. If you're going into the animation world though, you probably should go to like either do Animation Mentor online or something, because it's just too much to. I mean, you can read it in a book and try to figure it out based off of YouTube videos or something, and you probably can, but
it's probably going to take you much longer. And then there's always just the industry standard of the workflow process that is probably not what you're going to get from YouTube University or some online class or something like that, right?
Right. The reason why I say with a storyboard artist that you want formal training is your color theory, your anatomy, your perspective, and overall knowing how to pace yourself working.
Because it's so much more than just being able to draw, right?
The film language is really the most important part of it. If you don't understand how shots work, like, what are you doing?
Yeah. That makes sense. No, that makes perfect sense. Well, I can tell you, me personally, I haven't really got a chance or opportunity to work with a storyboard artist, but I'm sold. Like, I think, like, I definitely, I'm just thinking of like, wow, it's just like when you said the efficiency and just being able to flush out your scene and actually have like a visual representation of that without actually having to go out and shoot it, because a lot of times you get to set and things aren't exactly the way you may have pictured them, and it's like, oh, I had this great idea and it's in my shot list, but when we get there it doesn't look as good, or there's so many variables that could help with.
I cannot tell you how many directors I've come across that absolutely do not, and it's not their fault, it's just some people have communication skills and some people don't. They don't know how to communicate visually what they have in their head to their DP, or even like part of my job is to take what they're saying, however bad the communication is, and sit there and try to interpret what's going on in their head, and that's why I draw it out in front of them. And then once they have that, like, okay, can you move this here just a little bit over in that way? Like I can't, I'm like, oh man, that must be a nightmare for a DP. Trying to figure that out on the fly the day of, or even just a couple of days before the shoot.
It's I think filmmakers at whatever lane you're living in as a filmmaker, we're just glutton for punishment. That's what we like. We just want to be punished.
There are a lot of masochists in this industry for sure. I'm probably one of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is like, I always like talk to people when we have discussions, usually when it comes to the money portion of getting paid, right?
The part no one wants to talk about.
Yeah, because like at the end of the day, we're creatives. We don't we would do this if money wasn't a necessity. This is probably what we would all be doing anyways.
Right.
So it's like,
it's one of the reasons why I've stuck with it so long, because it is absolutely my passion. Like I live to work, work to live,
Yeah. Like there's not, for me, it's not a separation between what I do to earn a living and my life. Like it is my life. And I always try to encourage like
Oh,
all day long. That happens. But I always try to encourage like the new filmmakers and the people that, you know, when they ask advice is I always tell them to not be a bottom line person, like, cause that's, you're not gonna be fulfilled being a bottom line person. Like
what do
sometimes,
you mean by that?
meaning that I'm only gonna work if it's paid at this amount and I don't care about anything else.
Oh, right, okay.
You know what I mean? So it's kind of like sometimes you may take something a little bit less, but you know there's a great opportunity there that, you know, hey, this could really elevate my career and the net. It's just
Probably
about
have a middle ground somewhere in there where you still like if there's plenty of times I get I'll have people send me scripts and I really like the script but I know they can't pay the amount that I normally get paid, so we work out some sort of, that's what I talk about with my sliding scale. We work out something to where either the work's just not as detailed but they still get what they need, or like I'll ask them, hey, do you mind if I try out a new experimental style that I want to see? And like we just don't have a deadline,
Right.
And we, you know, and work something out that way for, you know, whatever amount. But I have to really like the project for that to happen.
So what kind of, so just out of curiosity, what kind of projects do you normally gravitate to? Like if it's like is it a specific genre? Is it or do you gravitate more towards a particular, maybe like the lead character or the antagonist? Like what is it for you that draws you in?
I really like dark noir type stuff.
Love that.
And I really like horror movies, but I've only really been able to do two. So somebody out there, please hire me to do another horror movie. I love horror. I'm wearing a horror movie shirt right now. Like it's I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to horror movies.
So do you write by any chance? Because I know you're constantly drawing out stories. Do you ever dabble in the script writing?
I am currently dabbling and have been dabbling, quote unquote, for the past like 6 years or so. I've got that where imposter syndrome where I'll write something out and like it's not good enough, or like I'll keep tweaking it. And also too, I mean, storyboarding is not exactly easy as far as anxiety and things like that go. When I'm done with a project, I'm usually exhausted. Mm-hmm. And I really need to be more of a student of my own craft and really hunker down. And actually my partner and I, she started getting into writing like a lot of people did over quarantine because, you know, nothing else going on.
Absolutely.
And we started writing together. Ironically, it's like a true crime fiction / horror movie.
Okay.
So we got 2 scripts that we're working on with that together. It's just been hard. I mean, the past 14 months have been ridiculous for everybody.
Yeah.
But it's still on the table, and we're still we'll scratch at it every once in a while.
So when you're writing, are you jumping back and forth from drawing? Do you start sketching out, or you're like it's just strictly, hey, I'm gonna hone in on just the writing piece. I'm not gonna jump the gun and start sketching out stuff.
My brain has a shutter anyway, so all that stuff that ends up on paper, I see in my head regardless. So when I'm writing,
I like that reference. My brain has a shutter. That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
I might steal it. I'm just saying.
That's fine. I won't call the Library of Congress or anything.
Cool.
But all that stuff's in my head anyway. I don't draw something out unless I have to show somebody what's up there, you know. So when I'm writing, it's already there, and I've always been that way. I don't know if it's because I was raised on movies, and I don't know, but my brain just thinks cinematically. I can't. Sometimes I was a slow reader, still am. When I'm reading a novel or whatever, like even if it's history, I have to go through and read certain things a couple of times over because I want to make sure I get that visual. I can't follow the story unless I'm playing the movie in my head.
Gotcha. That makes sense though. No, I think there's definitely an art form. Gotta love the train. And then they get super loud, like.
Just kidding. It's a tornado.
Yeah. It's a tornado. No, and I think if you spend any amount of time with anybody that's a quote unquote filmmaker or just all around storyteller, I think we automatically just see things differently. I think that's just something that our mind and eyes are just not trained, but it's just the way we're built. Like,
brains are wired that way.
Yeah, it's built to do that. You know what I mean? Because if we didn't, we wouldn't be very successful at like what we do. You know what I mean?
I was raised in a single parent household, and my mom worked all the time. She couldn't be around a lot because she had to provide. We didn't have a lot of money growing up or anything, so I spent a lot of my time either watching movies and then coming up with my storylines, like the sequels or something.
For sure.
I probably in my head, like with my Star Wars toys and everything, probably wrote like, I don't know, 3 volumes worth of what would be a comic book or something. Just coming up with scenes and like that had character arcs and all this stuff. Like even as a kid, like I understood how that worked. Like we needed to feel something. Mm-hmm. Because I mean, my whole thing of why I wanted to get into filmmaking to begin with was because all these films had these great influences on me, and they made me feel things. They really made me who I am. Like period.
That film and TV has such an, especially when you're talking about, I'm an 80s baby, so the films in the 80s and 90s are always going to resonate with me a little bit more, but I feel like those were the
Goonies, Monster Squad.
Those were the days of like real original storytelling. We're not
They weren't writing stories for CGI. They were writing stories to emote.
Yeah. And they were creating characters that we loved and that like we identified with. At some point, there was always going to be that one that you identified. Like when you watch like The Breakfast Club or The Goonies, something like that. You know what I mean?
But I mean, that's storytelling 101. You've got to have a character or a villain or both that you can resonate with. I mean, I think that's why, like Heath Ledger's Joker, a lot of people are like, hey, it kind of makes a little sense. He's just going about it the wrong way. So you kind of like have a little bit of empathy for at least the type of thinking. When what is it? I can't remember who said this, but the best villains are the ones that you understand, or the ones that make sense. Like those are always your best villains.
Some would argue and say Batman's the villain in that.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of a anti-hero vigilante, but because I mean, from a psychological standpoint, the guy needs to be locked up. I mean, he has control issues. I mean, like he literally has a backup plan to take out all the other Justice League members just in case.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know, but whatever. Batman is one of my favorite superheroes, so I'm also not like knocking on him. But I was just saying, like, just the way, like when you watch a certain action sequence, like from Indiana Jones or something, where he's like, it makes you excited, and you're like, woo, like you're on a roller coaster or something. And then you see a really sad scene where it's like, man, this hit home. Like, I'm literally fighting back tears. And then you see something like Hereditary, which dove into some sort of weird, like, archetypal Jungian fear that's very childlike. I remember watching that in the theaters. I already have bad anxiety anyway. I don't know why I love horror movies, but
you just like to feel. You want to feel it.
I think it's like a control thing. It's a way for me to sort of control it or whatever, because they terrified me as a child. Like, I was stuck watching the MCA Universal movies, like the monster movies back then, until I could handle like an actual. And Scream is the one that actually got me into modern horror.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I was watching Hereditary, and towards the end, like the last 20 minutes, I'm just sitting there, I'm just like, I need this to be over. Like, I had a hoodie in my lap, and I had to fight the urge just like a kid to go under the blanket. Like and some people that movie didn't do anything for, but for me, it tapped into something very.
See, my wife hates horror movies too, and I love them. Like, I grew up watching like Phantasm and all these.
Oh man, Phantasm 2 is still one of the best.
Yeah. And that's just like my mother was really, really into horror movies. So like I just always resonated with them. But my wife will not. She's like, I don't want to feel anxious throughout an hour and a half. Yeah. Being, where you have like the jump scares and all that. She's like, I don't want to be intense for 90 minutes.
Yeah.
I don't want to be on the edge of my seat.
That's why you got to stick to like the slasher movies where you can just make fun of it the whole time.
Well, so the last one that we watched together, and she was like, "I'm done," was The Descent.
Okay. Talk about anxiety. That movie, oof.
It was probably one for like, and I don't have like that same anxiety when I watch horror films, but it's like that was probably one of the scariest horror. And I think I don't know if there's the mixture of the claustrophobic,
It's claustrophobia for sure.
and the darkness and all those things, and then it was like she was like, "I'm done. I'm done." Like that was too much for her. She
Well, I
was like,
mean,
"I'm
even
done."
darkness is a sense of it's the unknown, and because I mean that's an archetype just in itself. The unknown versus not being able to move, which is a type of claustrophobia as well. And then you've got these things hunting you that have the upper hand on you. I mean that.
Right.
Oh gosh, I'm being a bad human IMDb today. I cannot remember who wrote and directed that. Anyway, yeah, that's one of my all-time favorites. I really enjoyed that one. I still rewatch it every couple of years or so, especially if it's on TV or something. Like, yes, Descent. Forgot about this movie.
And I mean, it starts with such a dramatic start too, like with the whatever that piercing pole is through the windshield, and it kills like her husband or whatever.
Right.
That
Spoiler
kind of,
alert. Should have seen it by now.
yeah, definitely, because it's definitely not new by any means.
But there's that underlying story too of like the cheating friend,
Right.
And like that creates it's sort of who's more human here, the like who, or actually who's more the monster, I guess would be more of the
Right.
concept
Yeah,
statement.
because I mean, yeah, there's I love stories like that
Yeah.
that kind of have like
you
where
think.
it make you think and it make you question, like, okay, who's really evil in
Right.
this scenario? Who's really the bad guy? And it kind of goes back to that Heath Ledger Joker, because is he really the bad guy? Because he's anti the system. He's bucking the system.
It's sort of the thing anytime you got to deal with like sci-fi AI movies where like Skynet's taken over and like they see human beings as a problem. Like technically they're not wrong, but
Right.
it's a fight for survival.
Yeah.
Between both sides, and they both had their own advantages. So I mean that's always like your greatest stories.
Yeah, for sure. It's
When there's
just
only 2 or 3 degrees of separation between the villain and the hero.
it's not much.
Yeah.
It's not much, and depending on the story and it going, if it plays out long enough, how long before
Right.
it crosses whatever that 2 to 3 is.
I think that's why Batman and the Joker, just in general, through all the canon, comic books, movies, whatever, is always such a. I mean, it's overplayed now, but the idea of them doing this dance forever, and like, I've even argued the fact that Joker doesn't even really care who Batman is. That's not the point for him. Like,
Right.
He would probably opt to not know if it was I think it would ruin it for him in some weird kind of way. But anyway, we don't have to keep talking about the Joker.
Yeah. So, but Gable, dude, it has been an absolute pleasure just sitting here talking with you
Absolutely.
about your craft. I definitely enjoyed it. I am definitely
Glad I
gonna-
made it down.
Yeah, me too, and I'm definitely going to figure out how we can work into the budget to get a storyboard artist on our
Yeah.
next project.
Absolutely.
Where can people check out your work and get in touch with you at?
I have a website. It is atlantastoryboards.com. And there's also a link to my Instagram there. Honestly, these days, it's so much easier to upload stuff to Instagram. That's where the majority of my most recent work is. But I still have my website for professional purposes.
Yeah, I think you always have to have the home base,
Right.
which is the website. But even if you're predominantly on, IG, are there any chance you have any of those animatics on your IG?
Not on my IG, but I do on my website.
I'm excited. I'm definitely going to check those out.
Well, I'm working on one, like I said, for T-Pain right now, but I can't show that to anybody just yet.
Right. No, I understand that.
But yeah, no, I honestly, a lot of people don't do animatics because they are expensive and they're so time consuming. But when you need it, and nothing's going to sub for that.
Right. That makes sense. So we will definitely include your IG and website in our show notes and
Awesome,
everything, and
yeah.
create the link. So people, if you need a really dope storyboard artist, this is your man. And I can tell his vibe is on point. So I feel like you sometimes, I think that's a big part of the creativity though, is like when it's like and you mentioned some people just can't communicate well, but I think in our realm, like the vibe and connection is just as important as the skill set. Like when you're trying to hash something out with somebody.
Well, I mean, even from a business point, I mean, but like I said, most storyboard artists are freelancers, and if you don't know how to network, that's yikes. You gotta find that inner extrovert.
Well, and it's funny you say that, because I think there's a large, like, especially like when you start looking at like people in crew positions, there's a lot of introverts.
Oh yeah. Not half and half. Like some people, like I'm half and half. I can bring out that extrovert, but I'm probably gonna need a minute or two alone when I get home after this.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to talk right now. I'm downloading the day.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think that's also a skill set within itself. But I definitely appreciate you coming out here to the M3 Creative Studio.
I really enjoyed this. This was great.
Absolutely. So we'll leave everything in there, guys, for you guys to check out Gable's work. And until next time, ciao.